Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 61 of Keeping Water. The fish are continuing to do really well. The carp have shown no further signs of ill health, which is particularly well timed as the autumn prep job I've done this week means they'll only be observable through the GoPro for a couple of months. The fry are exploring more of the pond and have all but stopped hiding in the spawning brushes, so I've removed them this week, as you'll see later. The other fish haven't really shown any signs of seeing them as food, which is nice, and the fry are getting increasingly speedy as they get bigger, so the risks are reducing for them. I'd like to thank you for choosing to watch this video. If it's the first of my videos you've watched, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be delighted if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you're back again to the channel and already a subscriber, thanks a lot to you as well. You're lovely people and make doing this YouTube business worth it. It's still a way off, but it's getting closer and closer to new carp day. I'm starting to get really excited now, although I need to be patient. They'll be the last fish I introduce into the pond and will hopefully have a big positive impact, not only on the pond itself, but also the current inhabitants. I hope you'll come back to watch future videos when I'll show their arrival and capture their progress over the coming months. Right, that's all the housekeeping done. Time to start with the main topic of this week's episode, how I cover the pond to keep leaves out in autumn. So today I've made my pond and garden look properly awful. The garden was a bit of a mess anyway, but I have successfully made it worse. And it's going to be like this for a while, easily into December. This is the joy of autumn in my garden, and the lengths I have to go to keep leaves out of the pond. I basically use a fine net across the entire surface of the pond and down the sides, and some weed membrane, this year, over the pebbles, the rationale for which I'll go into later. This is the cause of my problems, a beautiful thriving tree that provides both colour and shade behind our garden, except it's obviously not an evergreen, and all of that colour and shade has to go somewhere, and that somewhere appears to be my garden, specifically the pond. Managing this is a nightmare, both in preventing leaves from landing in the pond, sinking and then decaying, and clearing up all the leaves from the rest of the garden. The best way I've found is to cover the pond with netting, as it's easier, mostly, clearing them up from the garden than it is from the water. The first job to do before getting the net on is to cut the plants back to the height of the heron fence, which is what I use as a frame for the net. I also cut back some of the messier plants, although I'll do a better job of pruning and cutting them back for winter after autumn's done and the net's off. Although the tree's leaves are falling, the pond plants are still growing, and they will grow through the net until I finally take it off as we reach winter. The next job is to get out as many of the leaves as possible that have already fallen into the pond. I will still use the pond vac when the leaf net's on, but it's good to use the skimmer net while I still can. Finally, I can get the net on. I'm using a new one-piece netting this year. It's designed to keep insects off plants and is perfect to stop leaves that, especially when wet, can get through a lot of other netting. I used some piping and cable ties to keep the netting close and attached to the shed, and then ground pegs to fix the net into the ground. I bought netting large enough to not only cover the area of the surface of the pond, but also the sides of the heron fence, as leaves, helped by wind, will find any gap to get into the pond. I used a combination of cable ties and pegs at the front to make it easier to detach the net and fold it back when I clean the pond, and for when the new fish arrive, which is getting sooner by the day. The new approach I'm trying this year is to cover the pebbles with weed membrane. The reason I'm doing this is that leaves, again when wet or if broken up, are really difficult to clean up from the pebbles. It took me ages last year and was kind of backbreaking as I needed to basically do it by hand, as you can see here. I obviously have to clear up the leaves from around the garden before I can remove the netting from the pond, as they'll just end up in the pond otherwise. It's fairly easy from the rest of the garden, but not so much from the pebbles. So this year, I'm trying covering them. We'll see how it goes. So on with the membrane. I must admit that as I'm pretty much making the garden and pond look awful, I've just laid the membrane in a really rough and clumsy way. Being more precise and tidy wouldn't really make everything look much better, so I'll say I'm going with function over form, which is my default position anyway. I'll keep telling myself that and remember that it's not for too long. Right, all done. I fixed the membrane down at the front with blocks just to make it easier to remove when pond or filter cleaning. It does all look rough, but the fish couldn't care less, which is obviously important. In fact, I think they prefer it. I will obviously be continuing to feed them and will use the GoPro to film and keep an eye on them, which will be especially important in a few weeks when I add the 2 new carp, as I've said. The netting isn't perfectly smooth and flat, but it's easy enough to sweep leaves off during autumn. It's obviously a fairly sledgehammer to crack a nut approach to addressing leaves, but it works, and at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Thanks a lot for watching this episode of Keeping Water, I really do appreciate it. With the pond covered, it may seem like we're entering a quieter phase of the pond keeping year, but with new fish coming and it being even more important that I get the GoPro in and film them, there'll still be lots going on, and I hope you'll stick with me and watch more videos and maybe even subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.